So hi, everybody. My name is Patrick O'Horo. I am a principal solution engineer technologist at Microsoft. I'm coming on my 19th year now. The last 15 I've spent working with customers in the productivity and collaboration space. So Office 365, Microsoft 365, then Teams. And then now in the area of generative AI, the Copilot or M365 Copilot ecosystem. A little bit of an anecdote. I'm also a licensed clinical mental health counselor. And what that means is relevant to this is I have a huge passion on not just technology, but how technology impacts people and organizations and our habits. And one of the things that I typically struggle with is meetings. We did some early research during the COVID era around, like literally putting ECGs on people's brains and watching them interact with meetings as we went from this like in-person workforce to this remote or, meeting-based workforce. And what we noticed was that there's a huge tax on our brains when we have to interact with technology during meetings. Even though Teams, and using this data, we've kind of changed the Teams meeting layout and done a lot of things to try to help you focus on the meat of the meeting and not the friction of the tech in the meeting. It is still quite a tax. And for me personally, especially because I spend a lot of time presenting, and if I'm not talking, I'm typically thinking or trying to process what I'm hearing, taking notes, preparing for meetings, taking action items and things like that after a meeting tend to really, really tax me as well. And so what we know is that when we have ineffective meetings, not only do we reduce productivity, but we also increase things like burnout and fatigue. So Copilot in meetings is one of those ways that we can get some help in this process. I'm assuming that everybody that's joined the call has explored Copilot, so it's not really the goal of today's meeting to unpack all of the capabilities of Copilot, but Copilot's natively integrated into Teams. I don't have to use the Microsoft 365 Copilot app or chat per se to interact with chat, channel, and meeting content. I can do that natively within Teams to do things like summarize conversations, look for content, reason over those sources, and really catch up on my work. I get flooded with tons of different teams and channels and conversations, and that can be quite hectic to manage as well. So Copilot is a capability that helps me do that. Of course, we don't have just the chat capability, right? I can get into any thread. We have new agents and channels and things like that, where I have Copilot actually helping me process all of this information, keep me up to date, as well as help me with the workflow around the work, things like reminders and nudges and task assignment and things like that. But where I find a ton of value, and I'm finding my customers finding a ton of value, is in our ability to capture and help us with meetings. Now, many of you are probably familiar with things like meeting recap that actually predated Copilot as a feature at Teams Premium, and I will be talking about that today. But Copilot just in a meeting can help me be productive in that meeting. So it's not just about missing, catching up on what I missed or getting after action items, right? I can have Copilot nestled in that meeting as a digital productivity assistance during that meeting. But Copilot alone is great. But when we think of generative AI solutions at Microsoft, we're thinking that, everybody has this personal productivity assistant that's really tied to them, private to their data. But then we have this concept of agents, and agents are tailored generative AI applications that help us in different business functions. They'll be grounded in particular knowledge. They'll have an instruction set. They may have specific skills that help them help us in our productivity in that function. And so there's lots of what we call first-party agents. These are agents built by Microsoft. You may be familiar with things like Researcher and Analyst, but Facilitator is one of those agents as well. It's a little bit different, and I'm going to talk about the difference of Facilitator from other agents. Most agents I will interact with through Copilot app or through Copilot chat. I will mention them or leverage them much like I would a colleague. Facilitator is a little different in that it's natively integrated into the code of Teams. So should you have the appropriate license and the appropriate configuration in your tenant or within your meeting, then Facilitator's there to give you a hand. And I'll actually show you and give you a tour of how Facilitator works. So as I mentioned, Facilitator is an agent that proactively works alongside me, not just during the meeting, but before the meeting, during the meeting, and after the meeting. So whereas meeting recap is kind of an after action summary and some productivity assistance, Facilitator is actively working alongside me in the meeting, helping me prepare for the meeting, helping me track progress through the meeting, even doing things like assigning tasks and follow-up items. Additionally, Facilitator works in the meeting chat as well. So it's just like another participant in the meeting. It will tell me, Pat, we're getting towards the end of the meeting. It's time to wrap up. Here's the remaining things you might want to talk about. And it can nudge us along the way during the meeting to make our meeting more productive. So take a step back and talk about just meetings in general. Like I said, especially around the 2020 time when, a lot of workers went remote, a lot of things transformed around meetings. One thing I'm going to pop up and talk about, although it's really mutually exclusive from Copilot or the Facilitator, is something that we call the Meet app. This has been one of my favorite apps in a long time. It's a Microsoft app. And I would encourage you to go install it in Teams and use it. However, I have some bad news. It's actually being deprecated. It's going to be transitioned into something that we call the Events app. So just my little PSA, if you're using the Meet app today, you should see a little banner that we're kind of transitioning that. And you're seeing more the Meet app capabilities showing up in things like Copilot itself. But then we come to Recap. Now, Recap blew my mind in the early Teams Premium days when we came out. This was like GPT 3.5 and Copilot, where we had the ability to have artificial intelligence take a record or a transcription of a meeting and generate a post-meeting output for us. So here, the salient points here is really it's after the meeting. It's not helping me with the productivity of the meeting, but it's really helping me distill what happened. So within a recap, if I have recording on, I can actually watch the video, but meeting recap will identify different speakers. Now, in the speaker thing, one thing that I will point out is if we all join a Teams meeting individually, Teams can identify us. But if we join a meeting and we're in a room with many other speakers, we can use things like voice recognition and face recognition to help Teams meeting recap or Copilot identify us as well. And so when we have that separation, meeting recap can distinguish between what I say or what my colleagues say. And then on the right of the screen here, you'll see that it gives me an AI summary. Now, I'm actually going to open up a meeting recap and kind of show you some of the new features there, because this still is very effective tool, especially for those that don't have Copilot but do have Teams Premium. But I will get an AI-generated summary of the meeting, and now we have the ability to create templates and actually kind of customize the way those summaries are written. But the great thing now is that with Copilot and Facilitator, we have an agent interacting and participating in the meeting with us. Again, it helps me before the meeting in preparation, but during the meeting, what it's actually doing is co-authoring a note with me. As I open up and I go into demo, I'll actually show you the Notes tab, how that changes when we turn Facilitator on and how we can interact with it. But on the back end, what it's doing is it's using something called a loop page or loop component. If you've been working with Copilot, you may have explored Copilot pages. Those are also loop pages. And loops are really cool in that they're kind of like a OneNote in the cloud, to where I can have one source of information that I update. Let's say I have a table and a loop component and I update that. If I copy that component and I send it in an email or I put it in a document and I update it, anywhere I update it, it will update all of those loop pages or loop components wherever they are. So it's really nice that I'm using another capability within the Microsoft 365 ecosystem to actually write and co-author these notes for me. The really great thing that I love about Facilitator over meeting recap, because, you know, for me, I get out of a meeting, and meeting recap is pretty sufficient a lot of times, making sure that I have the gist of what happened or any follow-up items. A big challenge for a lot of organizations and a lot of meeting facilitators with a meeting recap is that they have stuff to do after the meeting if they use recap. They've got to copy those notes, vet them, and then they've got to distribute them, right? They've got to send emails out and things like that. And moreover, if you're having meetings with people outside of your organization, they don't have access to that recap. So now I'm downloading videos and things like that and trying to share it. With Facilitator, I don't have those same challenges. With Facilitator, because I'm using a loop component, everybody in the meeting gets to participate in the notes, and everybody that was in the meeting can come back to that meeting afterwards and see the notes and continue to collaborate on that information. But moreover, where recap required recording and transcription in order to produce an output, Facilitator agent doesn't. And so we'll talk about something called Copilot during meeting only mode. And so for those organizations that tend to be a little bit more conservative around recording and transcription, we can still enable a high level of productivity pre, during, and post meeting with the use of Facilitator. So as I kind of dive a little bit more into what Facilitator it is a what we refer to as a declarative agent. It's built into the Microsoft 365 Copilot ecosystem and uses other components and agents within that ecosystem to deliver value in our meetings. It generates co-authored notes. So it's not just one set of notes and then, you know, I have to write separate notes. And the way I like to think of this is Facilitator's capturing what is spoken and shared on the screen, but it's not capturing what's in our head. So oftentimes, you know, we're writing down or jotting down our other little notes as well. So when we have a co-authored note, those are in one place, and I don't have to have data kind of bifurcated or separated, and then I have to put it together separately. The second key point I want you to take away is the shared access, right? So even the people that are participating in the meeting that don't have a Copilot license get the benefit of watching Facilitator get those notes, interact with those notes, and co-author them as well. And that would include, based on your organization's policies around loop components, whether or not you allow external participants to access those notes as well. And again, we're going to talk quite a bit today about the legal implications of recording and transcription. So knowing that Facilitator allows me to support legal compliance around meetings and corporate policy around that, still enabling productivity without having a durable recording or transcript. And then lastly on that is the integrated workflow. It's the ability for Facilitator to hear that I have a task or an assignment in a meeting and actually facilitate the assignment of that task through something like To-Do or Planner, or down the road like a project manager agent, where I can actually have telemetry that helps me and the team and the managers of a project make sure that those action items are being satisfied, getting updates, and being completed. So we're streamlining task management. Okay. So I've created a little table just to put, you know, meeting recap next to Facilitator. Again, I'm not harping on meeting recap. I think it's great. But again, it's only after the meeting ends, where Facilitator is pre, during, and post meeting. Meeting recap is available to non-Copilot users if I have a Teams premium license, but it is also included as part of that Copilot license. And to enable Facilitator in the meeting, the organizer or co-organizer of the meeting needs to have the Copilot license. Okay. For distribution of a meeting recap, I've got to copy, I've got to paste, I've got to send out a chat message or an email or something like that. And while I may do that in a loop component, again, I'm kind of separating data. So now I've got to go find that artifact, and that artifact ends up having a lifecycle of its own, which may be very separate from the meeting or the project that we're working on. Whereas Facilitator, it's kind of bringing it all in together. And as I leverage those loop components, I know I have one source of truth. No matter how I disseminate that information or how it's updated, it'll all come back to that loop component. From a compliance perspective, we're going to talk about some key legal terms around discoverability of data, but just really the takeaway is that Facilitator, I can leverage that without having to turn on a durable transcript or recording. So before I get into demo, I want to talk about some of this key terminology, especially when it comes down to legal compliance. I've had many customers who their legal team is very resistant to allowing unclassified recording or transcription of meetings. And the issue there is that is really around discoverability, right? We get a subpoena, we get a lawsuit, something like that, and then we have a recording or a transcript. Now we have to go back to verbatim spoken word, and a lot of legal organizations realize that there's a level of risk there that they're not willing to take. And so the exact terms for this challenge that our friends in legal have is electronically stored information and non-persistent data. These are the key legal terms, and we've vetted this through customers as well as Microsoft's chief legal organization around these terms. So when I get something like a subpoena, what they'll be looking for is electronically stored information, not non-persistent data. And so we'll talk today about how our transcription service, alongside using Copilot only during meeting mode, leverages non-persistent data to enable things like Facilitator, as opposed to electronically stored information like a recording or transcript that meeting recap requires. The transcript itself is just a durable artifact. It is electronically stored information. It may have its own retention lifecycle within your team's policies, right? So I can have a separate retention policy for things like recording and transcriptions than I do for chat and channel messages or emails or things like that. But if I do have a transcript, it is discoverable because it is considered electronically stored information. But that transcript comes from something called our transcription service. This is a back-end system using Azure Cognitive Services and things like that that are integrated into Teams. It's the same service that powers things like our live caption or our translation services. And it also supports some aspects of recordings, specifically the transcription that we can reason over. So we do have a way now with Copilot to leverage that transcription service without writing a permanent transcript or an electronically stored information to disk. What we do in the scenario with Copilot only during meeting mode is we create a transcript, think of it in a bubble. So as soon as I turn Facilitator on or I have Copilot on, I have this transcript. But as soon as I turn Copilot or Facilitator off, we pop that bubble. So it's never actually written to disk or stored, and from a legal perspective is considered non-persistent data. I'll actually show you how to configure Copilot only during meeting mode. There's a few ways that we can do this. One, we can do it at the organizational level with Teams meeting policies. The other is that the end user or organizer of a meeting can do that within the meeting options as well. If we have things like Teams Premium and we're using meeting templates, or if you have sensitivity labels deployed in your auto labeling, you can also build into your schema how a label turns on or off different features as well. So I'll show you a little bit about labeling. I won't go super deep into that, but I'll show you how Facilitator recognizes all of those things like sensitivity labels and access controls so that we don't inadvertently expose data. Okay. And then I won't unpack this again, but when we look at persistent data, that's anything stored to disk, emails, documents, transcripts, chat logs, things like that. But non-persistent data is things that are saved in like RAM buffers, right? So real-time meeting notes that are not saved using Copilot only mode. And if you need more information on that, we definitely have some guidance and articles to help you. If you need to discuss this with your own legal teams, feel free to reach out to your AI business solution account teams, and then we can engage our CELA resources, because in my experience, the lawyers within corporate legal never want to hear from a technical guy. They want to hear from another lawyer. So we do have our own CELA representatives that are willing to join those meetings and discuss this, and hopefully unblock the power of Copilot and Facilitator for you if you find your organization does have a more conservative posture around transcripts and recordings. So I'm going to switch gears here, and I'm actually going to do some demos and kind of open this up. And of course, live demos are always a hoot. So wish me luck. The first thing I'm going to do, though, is I'm just going to pop over the meeting that we're in, right? So we've been running for a while, and as Sarah mentioned, right, we did have recording and transcription enabled, but we also had Facilitator enabled. So the way Facilitator works is that every Teams meeting has a notes tab. You'll see this one is emboldened with our AI diamonds. It means artificial intelligence is in this meeting. So during the course of this meeting, Facilitator's actually been listening to me. You'll see here that while somebody actually has the notes component open and they can look at this, Facilitator is also in here taking notes, and I have my sensitivity label here as well. So anything that we write in here, the classification label and the rights and privileges to that data based on that label will be respected. So of course, all generated content may be incorrect. We're always going to have that. So it is still on the duty of the facilitator to make sure these notes are accurate. Now, we didn't actually have an agenda put into this meeting, but if we had, facilitator would have thrown that agenda into the meeting for us, helping us prepare for the meeting. But as you'll see, as I've been talking, facilitator's been taking notes alongside me. And I can see that this was an AI note because I have the icon here, right? And so as I talk, it's just actively creating notes. And of course, if I have a thought and I want to, add an additional note, I can use the power of notes and I can put in other components, or I could just start typing, Sarah was, super helpful in getting this going, right? So I have a note here and I've co-authored this note. Now, something that you'll see here again is that I have this iconography that says AI took this note. When I mouse over the note that I wrote, you can see that I wrote it. So we don't have this like mishmash of information where we don't know where it came from. Persistent within this loop page, within notes, is this type of telemetry. And moreover, maybe Patrick doesn't want to be named in the note as someone in particular. So I might come in and actually change that note. So even though it was an AI generated note, I can still edit it. So what you'll notice is, yes, I have this iconography that it was an AI powered note, but when I select the word someone, whoops, you'll see that I actually wrote that word. So as far as the accountability around the note, we're not totally just delegating this off to AI. We can see where AI was helpful. We can see where any individual person that had a note open or wrote a note made some type of update. And then I'm going to say a couple of things because I'm going to come back to this later. But I just want to remind Sarah, if she would please follow up and make sure I get a copy of this recording. I would also love Sarah to do a follow-up to make sure I get the poll results. And then I'm going to give a follow-up to myself to make sure that I share and disseminate the value of Facilitator to other people by referencing to the master class web series. And so what we'll see is that Facilitator has heard me, and once it thinks about it a little while, it should create some follow-up tasks, and I'll circle back to this and show you. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears here. I'm going to jump back here to meeting recap. So again, just for those of you, I'm sure many of you are familiar, it's been around for several years, but here I have the example of the meeting recap. I have the video, I have the speakers, so I can really dial in to where, a particular point in a video where, I wanted to hear somebody speak about a particular thing. We also categorize this by topics, right? So meeting recap will break down based on the meeting transcript and help me different topics. And of course, I can narrow it in to different chapters as well. Meeting recap also includes any of the shared content that was there. So I don't have to go around trying to find these things or pinging people and asking them for a copy of the documents or something like that. I can come right back to the meeting recap and get them. What meeting recap gives us, though, is this AI summary. This is the magic where after the meeting is completed, then we process that recording or transcription, and we generate some notes, follow-up tasks, things like that. What you'll notice in the meeting recap is while I have these follow-up tasks, I can't do anything to really assign them. So as a meeting facilitator or project organizer or something like that, if I want to, let's say, follow up with Miguel, I got to copy and paste this, and I need to go into some type of app, and I need to create some type of workflow or a planner task or something like that to help me do that. There is no like actual telemetry. It says the word Miguel, but it's not using like an @ mention to Miguel to help me with that workflow. Of course, I have a notes tab, and as you'll see this loop icon, I can create a loop page for this meeting, but this is just totally human curated, right? I would generate a page and I would type notes. The meeting recap is doing nothing to help me there. Now, one advancement that we have had with meeting recap is the ability to do custom summaries, and we give you a couple of those. So, I can say the AI summary really isn't targeted to the person or the context that I want. So I can do something like an executive report, and it will reformat on the fly that transcript into that template. But I can also create a custom template. And so what I can do here is I can actually describe what I want that template to be. If I want it in a specific format, like a Scrum or something like that, I could do that. Now, today, in the custom summaries, this isn't Copilot, right? This is just a text box. So what I would suggest if you wanted to do custom summaries is go to Copilot, describe to Copilot kind of what you want, have it create a summary format for you, and then copy and paste that over here. And then once you save and apply that summary, it will persist for you, right? So you don't have to do that every time. The custom template will show up in all your meeting recaps for you to use. And then, of course, all of the participants in my meeting, they're going to want these key updates and action items and things like that. So as a meeting facilitator, what do I have to do? I have to figure out how to share this recap to them. And I may have a lot of challenges doing that with people outside of my organization. Or I have to copy this information and I have to paste it into a channel or paste it into an email. And again, I'm bifurcating that information. As opposed to, I'm just going to jump back to our meeting. Nope, no follow-up tests yet. Okay. So I'm going to show you one more facilitator. Oops.
Patrick, I have one question in the chat that might be applicable right now.
Sure.
So the question is, do we feel like, because the recap has the context of the entire meeting when it creates it, the recap of the meeting, does it make better notes than the facilitator that creates notes in real time? Do we have an opinion on that?
I don't know that I have. I would say I don't think it creates better notes because, yes, I have the full scope of the meeting, but I don't have any way to really check them during the meeting, right? So after the meeting, I get to see, if the AI summary was useful. I might create a custom summary. I might actually open up Copilot and reason over that transcript and try to get the information I want. But it's really it's too late, right? It's after the meeting and I don't have the ability to see there and see if something was stated. So for instance, like an action item, maybe I said, Sarah, would you follow up with something? And maybe it doesn't catch it. Because I have to wait till after the meeting, how do I validate that? I have to remember that. I have to go into that cognitive load that I have to remind myself to do that. Now I can use Copilot and I can say, hey, did anybody say this? But again, it's more effort, it's more task. When I'm using Facilitator, it is starting kind of the whole time if I've enabled it. The cool thing about Facilitator is I can turn it on and off during the meeting. So maybe I'm having a meeting and I want it to capture meeting minutes, and then I want to have a sidebar conversation, so we can kind of ask facilitator to leave the room. We can have that conversation, and we can ask facilitator to come back in the room and resume. So I get a little bit more fidelity with what I want, but then also because facilitator is generating a note during the meeting, I can validate it in real time. So if I see that it didn't capture a note, or it didn't capture the spirit in the note in the way that is helpful to me, I can fix it right then. And I don't have to just rely on like whatever AI produces after the meeting when it's too late.
And on that, there was another question about who's able to see the notes as they're being generated. And I heard you say that it was everyone in the meeting, as long as they have access. If they're outside of the meeting, or excuse me, outside of your organization, they may not see the notes. Can you just clarify that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and a great kind of segue. So here I'm in a meeting recap again. And so in this one though, what you'll see is that facilitator was actually in this meeting. The last one I showed you, I had an AI summary, but I didn't have any notes because facilitator wasn't on. So although I am in a meeting recap, when I click the notes tab, you'll see that I have these AI generated notes, right? So during the course of this meeting, it captured a bunch of notes for me. Now you'll also see that this is a loop component, right? So, and it has a sensitivity label. So I can click this loop component. And what I'm getting is I can do this in the Loop app. I will also see this in my pages in the Copilot app. So I have this link to my meeting, right? So it's under my meetings catalog, and I can always just go back to my OneDrive, my meetings, and I'll see all of those loops for any time I've had facilitator enabled. I have my sensitivity label, so I can control access at this level. And then anybody that was in the meeting will have access to this note. So they'll have it both by just coming back to the meeting right here. Whoops, sorry. So if they come back to the meeting, they come back to the recap, they would have that. If they just opened up the meeting or rejoined the meeting, they would see the notes. So everybody that joined the meeting, they knew how to get to the meeting. And as long as they know how to get to the meeting, they know how to get to a recap or the notes. Now, if they don't have a license, they can't get to the recap. So that's always been a problem with things like AI summaries and custom summaries, but they will have access to the notes tab. So they can just come back to the meeting, they can click that loop, and then they can see that. My comment about external participants or other orgs is that access to Loop, like any other service like SharePoint or OneDrive, is controlled by policy. So your administrators may have decided to allow people to share Loop pages outside the org or not. If they have enabled Loop access, then those external participants can just come to the Loop page. So I guess I'm opening it twice, right? And then they can come in here and they can work on this note. Now, the cool thing, unlike recap, is that even though the meeting is over, I can still work on this note. So this becomes not just a notes page, but a working surface for collaborating and continuing to work on this project or this meeting. So of course I can jump back into the recap if I want to refresh my memory on the note, if I want to hear something firsthand, look at the transcript, get access to shared content or documents. And then what you'll see is I can continue to come down here, and write additional notes, right? So I can continue to work on this content way after the meeting, but I haven't had to copy and paste. I haven't had to create another home for this information. Everybody knows how to get to it. And again, if I come in here and I do something like copy this loop component, and let's say I put it into something like an email or a SharePoint site or something like that, I throw it into a chat. Anybody that gets a link to this and they update it in that source, let's say I put it in an email and they get the email and they see these notes, they can still update these notes in that one email and it will update it here as well. They don't need to reply to everybody and then bifurcate, and have multiple copies of these notes with different versions. That's the power of Loop, is that there's one source of truth, and no matter how I disseminate that information, I'm always coming back and updating the source of truth. So then moreover, I can invite additional people to collaborate in this as well. In this demo that I recorded, I only had one participant, but I would have all the participants here. So you can think of it just the same as like co-authoring a Word doc or an Excel file or something like that.
That's awesome. Super helpful. So just one more, and then I'll have you continue on. We have 20 minutes left. Do you have to say the word follow-up or task or something, next step or something in order for it to put the follow-up tasks in there?
You don't have to, but I have learned that, so the way I think of it, and kind of an anecdote, when I talk to customers about using Copilot, whether I'm talking about prompting skills or using agents, I often talk about skilling, what makes good prompts. And the core of that is my mindset around using Copilot as a personal assistant and setting it up for success. So much like if I had a personal assistant and I said, hey, I want a coffee, they might go find me a coffee. It may not be what I want. If I tell them, specifically the size, the flavor, the place that I want it, the temperature, right, I'm more likely to get back my expected result. And so what I've been trying to do is, much like I would ask somebody that was joining the meeting as a note taker or a project manager or something like that, who's helping me facilitate, is just be very clear in my language and not hope that AI is smart enough to intuit that when I said, hey, Sarah, I really want that report by tomorrow, that it knows that it needs to create a follow-up task for you to give me that report. Now, it might do that. It might catch that and say, yeah, I should create a task for Sarah to do that. And in my experience, it's pretty good. But I try to get into the habit of knowing that you're working with an assistant and setting them up for success. So, I will try to remind myself in new meeting etiquette habits to say, hey, Sarah, I want that report tomorrow. Will you please follow up with me? Or I would like it due or something like that. So it's just particular language. And we just want to, AI is not perfect. Generative AI is not perfect. And so anything that we can do to make it more successful, that's good. So to succinctly answer your question, no, you do not need to specifically say that, but you're likely to get better outcomes when you do.
I'm really curious about this one. I'm really sorry, but it is a really good question. Is it possible to speak or address the facilitator and ask it to correct a note that it's made? Is that a thing?
So we don't have that today. You can, of course, you can come in as a person, and I can make a correction. And so, I think I kind of prefaced that with, this note at the top that it's AI generated. And so we want to watch that as we go. And so, yes, that is a habit, but it's a less of a habit than me actually having to think to write a note. And if you're anything like me, as soon as I touch a mouse, a keyboard, a pencil, half my brain turns off. I'm so focused on doing that, I'm no longer able to listen with full fidelity. And so, it's a lot easier for me to validate the note and then pause to make a change than it is to try to capture it in the first place. Where we are going, and I will specify this, that there's zero announcements about this. There's no promises at all. But what I have seen is experimental work going on and having the facilitator have a voice. So much like Copilot in voice mode, where I can have an interacting conversation, I would highly speculate that in the future you will see facilitator have additional capabilities as agents evolve to be able to use voice and speak with us. And kind of like you, I'll use the term interject right into a meeting and say, hey, Pat, just want to let you know we got 5 minutes left, or ask facilitator to do a specific thing and have it verbalize it back. And ironically, like as I'm talking right now, I don't know if you saw that in the notes section, but it was just kind of ripping out a note about that as I was talking. So you'll see it actively writing as we go. That being said, I can use facilitator in the chat. So you'll see when I jumped over to the chat here, facilitator knew we were having a meeting. So even before the meeting started, it threw the agenda in there so that we were more productive. And then, as we went, it said, oh, you're at your midpoint. and here's, some summaries. And as we get closer to the end, it'll pop up another one and tell me, hey, it's time to wrap up. Here's maybe some things you've missed of the agenda, or, some steps or suggestions of what you might want to do to wrap up the meeting more effectively. So to succinctly answer that, no, I can't interact with Copilot or a facilitator in a way to correct itself. There's still, it's wholly independent from Copilot as a function, which does allow me to do that, right? I always have Copilot in a meeting, and I can ask it to do things. And I could even do it, like I might be able to say, create an action item, create a task, update a note, but facilitator's not there to do two-way dialogue at this point, right? It's still just co-authoring a note with me. Hopefully that answers the question. Okay. So I talked a little bit about the loop component, right? Those loop pages, the classification, looking at policies. Now I want to switch gears and actually talk about how do you turn it on? And so I have a meeting here. I'm in Teams. I'm just going to go to one that I had previously on. This was a Teams meeting, and you'll see that I can see in the meeting that facilitator was already added. So when I go to the meeting options as an organizer to the meeting, I can come down to recording and transcription and Copilot and other AI capabilities. Now, something you might notice in my tenant here is under recording transcription, I don't have an option, right? I don't have the ability as an organizer to turn on recording or transcription because I've set this up to really reflect that conservative environment where it's not authorized to record or transcribe meetings. But I do have the option to turn on Copilot only during meeting mode, and I have the ability to turn on facilitator. Now, I can always turn on Copilot once the meeting starts, and I can turn on facilitator after the meeting starts. However, I would highly encourage you, especially when you have like meetings that you're going to want facilitator or you're going to want some type of summarization of that meeting, to get into the habit of configuring these options either within the meeting, or if you have Teams Premium, using meeting templates that configure those options for you. My biggest pet peeve at Microsoft in my current professional life is how used to everybody is they turn on transcription, but they forget to turn on facilitator. So we have to wait for the meeting, and then we get this meeting recap, but now we're in the workflow of like disseminating the notes and doing all of those things. So if I can encourage you to do anything, it's turn on facilitator early and often. And if you know that it's a meeting, especially a standing meeting or something like that, where you're going to want kind of this output, I would highly suggest adding it as part of the meeting options. I'm also going to show you over here, now I'm in the Microsoft Teams Administration Center. So if I do want to control these settings, I do it under meetings and meeting policies. And when you scroll way down to the policies, you'll see these settings on recording and transcription. So you'll see here, this is my global policy in the tenant. Of course, policies, we can apply different policies to different people. So this doesn't have to be all or nothing for your organization. For a lot of organizations that are resistant to enable transcription and recording, one of my recommendations, but not fully against it, one of my recommendations is that they have a short video on things like meeting access, meeting classification, the appropriate use of electronically stored information and things like that. And then once they attest to taking that training, they get added to a group, which would then give them a meeting policy that allowed them to use those features. So that's something kind of orchestrationally that you can use to, not just turn features on or off and hope that people don't misuse them, but actually, introduce some education into the process. But in this example, I've turned off meeting recording. I've turned off the ability to use transcription. So this would absolutely kill meeting recap. It's just, even if I had a Copilot or a Teams Premium license, it's of no value because it is not available to me with that. Ironically, excuse the digression, but live captions is almost always enabled for my customers because it's an accessibility feature, except they don't seem to want to, some organizations don't want to allow transcription. And so as I approach them around things like Copilot in meeting only mode, what you'll see here. And whether or not we have, non-persistent data or electronically stored data, Copilot during meeting only mode is using the same capability as live captions. So if we're allowing live captions on, I think you have a pretty good solid argument to turn on Copilot in meeting only mode. So this is where I control that in Copilot. I can turn it on, I can turn it off, or I can have this on with transcript saved or not. Now, as you'll see, because I have recording and transcription disabled, those are grayed out for me. I can't turn them on. I can only turn them on or off via policy. So when it's on via policy in this configuration, it doesn't force it on in the meeting. It enables it as a capability for me as an organizer. And then at that point is when I will want to come into my meetings. I will have that option to turn it on during meeting mode, and I will have the option to enable Facilitator as well. Okay. So I'm just going to kind of jump back. I think I kind of unpacked most of that content. I'm assuming that this presentation will be included. So I've grabbed some screenshots of this stuff as well. Creating a new meeting. Of course, we have to have a Teams meeting enabled, and then I get a toggle to turn Facilitator on, which starts working well before the meeting starts, right? It's looking at the agenda. It's looking at the attendees. Oops. I scrolled instead of clicked. Sorry about that. And then, of course, as soon as I turn that on, I get the loop component as well. So, even before the meeting, everybody that's in the meeting or invited to the meeting can go into that loop component. We can start throwing our stuff in there, right? We can start, instead of just posting PowerPoints and Word docs and Excel files, we can use the power of loop to be the artifact that we do and we use to collaborate on the content. I can do that well before the meeting. And then, of course, using my meeting options to define when do I want Copilot and Facilitator or Facilitator enabled. And then lastly, within the policies, how do I control meeting recording, transcription, and the availability of Copilot and Facilitator? Now, again, you'll see Copilot. You won't see a Facilitator option in recording. So by enabling Copilot, you are enabling Facilitator, but you are not turning it on. So the organizer still needs to be able to turn that feature on. So in summary, I try to give an overview of like Copilot, what its role in meetings is, right? I have it as an assistant to help me reason over the chat, the conversation, if I'm recording or transcribed or any of the documents, as well as the full power of Copilot, doing market research or anything else that has to do with work IQ or web data that's there right within the context of the meeting. Of course, we have a meeting recap, which requires meeting transcription and recording and only presents its production or productivity benefits after the fact, whereas Facilitator is a member of the meeting working alongside and with me as well. And then lastly, if you do have an organization that is resistant to recording and transcription, but you want to improve the productivity of the meetings, dive into the information that I've had in the deck around things like using Copilot in meeting only mode and creating and using non-persistent data as opposed to that durable electronically stored information that is considered discoverable. And I'll go ahead and pause there for any further questions.
This has been great, Patrick. We do have some questions in the Q&A that we can ask. Does Facilitator recognize reoccurring meetings?
Absolutely. So with reoccurring meetings, it'll do, let's talk about meeting recap and Facilitator. So meeting recap is supportive of reoccurring meetings, and what you'll often see in them is a drop down for the date on the different times or different occurrences. So you have to skip around to get those. With Facilitator, it's quite the same, but I'll have one note. And so now I don't have to jump around to different events to get the summary like I do in recap. I'll have that one loop page that's tied to the note. So when you think about things like Scrum meetings, project management meetings, things like that happen on a reoccurring basis, and I need meeting minutes, I'm just updating the same note, and I don't have to scramble around and find all the different versions. So, we had the meeting last week. We had some action items. We come in this week. Boom, there it is. There's our loop page with all of our AI co-authored notes. And Facilitator, because it knows those previous events, is going to help me, right? So right before I start out that meeting, it's going to be like, here's what happened the last time, and anything that we decided to maybe talk about. So definitely useful, if not even more useful in reoccurring meetings.
Yeah, I agree. We use it in our Teams meetings. So, like our internal meetings, I should say. Okay, another question, and I think you covered this, but I think it's really good for us to talk about it. Can you set your personal default to always turn on facilitators
I
for the
don't
meetings
think,
that I create?
yeah, I don't think you can. I think you have to do it in the meeting options. Yeah, there's no, I'm not familiar. I would actually have to go play around with the Teams settings, but I don't believe that's a default that we can set today.
Okay, awesome. Let me just pause and see if anybody has any questions on the phone.
Yeah, and I do see that another question about allow Copilot only during meeting option. That is actually available. It just doesn't read out that way. So as you saw in the presentation, right, I turned off recording, I turned off transcription. So those weren't options. And then in the Copilot option, it was either on or off by policy. When those options to do recording and transcription are off and I'm turning Copilot on, I am enabling Copilot only during meeting mode. So it's just it is there. It's just kind of a semantics verbiage discrepancy, for lack of a better term, in the UI, but it is enabling Copilot only during meeting mode.
Thanks for catching that.
Okay.
Okay, for some of the customers that have deployed this, what are some of the biggest measurable improvements that they've seen in using Copilot and Facilitator in their meetings?
Twofold. One, way more productive meetings. Actually, I'll say three. For the attendees, way more productive meetings. It's a muscle, just like Copilot. It's a muscle we have to develop. And so, really having a rigorous training and education program around how to use Loop, how to write your notes. Don't just scribble them everywhere else and put them together, right? Let's work more efficiently and effectively by leveraging the notes tab and co-authoring with Facilitator. I would say the next thing is, from an organizer perspective, a huge reduction in workload, preparing for the meeting, and most importantly, disseminating notes. Like anybody that facilitates and organizes a lot of meetings knows that there's a lot of work after the meeting too, getting that information out. And then especially if you have to have follow-ups or reoccurring meetings, is getting and disseminating everybody's information and putting it together to continue that productivity. So this really, Facilitator, in my opinion, really eliminates that, because everybody can go get access to that. And I don't have to worry about dissemination of the content at all. And then lastly, I would say we're more engaged. We can focus more on our thoughts and our personal skills than trying to just like write notes and track action items and things like that. One thing, sorry, I didn't actually show you in the demo, is when you do have an action item, I could say, I can actually choose, Sarah, and I can set like a due date, and then you'll get the signals to do that. So all of that workflow is eased. And then I think, yeah, lastly, I would say, for those that can't have recording and transcription on, because maybe people aren't consenting to being recorded or transcribed, or it's not available via policy, still being able to enable productivity during the meeting.
I love it. Thank you. Okay, well, I think that's a wrap. Thank you so much, Patrick, for this session.